The funeral flowers were still fresh when Marcus showed up at my door with his brother Damien, both dressed in dark suits that cost more than most people spend on rent. I'd buried their father just 3 days before, and already they were here to divide up what they thought was theirs. I'm Catherine Wells, 61 years old, and I'd spent 24 years married to Thomas Wells, a man who built an empire from nothing and loved me with a fierce protectiveness that I didn't fully understand until after he was gone. His sons from his first marriage had tolerated me for 2 decades, calling me by my first name, never Mom, never even Catherine unless they wanted something. And now, standing in the doorway of the home Thomas and I had built together, they wanted everything. Marcus was the older one, 47, with his father's height but none of his warmth. He'd inherited Thomas's sharp features, the strong jaw and piercing gray eyes, but where Thomas had used those traits to inspire loyalty and trust, Marcus wielded them like weapons. He worked as a corporate lawyer in Chicago, the kind who specialized in hostile takeovers and making sure the fine print always favored his clients. Damien was 43, softer around the edges but no less calculating. He ran some kind of investment firm in New York, though Thomas had once told me in a rare moment of frustration that Damien's success was more smoke and mirrors than substance. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. The house felt too quiet without Thomas. Even during his illness, when he could barely speak above a whisper, his presence had filled every room. Now there was just emptiness and the faint scent of the lilies people kept sending, flowers I'd stopped arranging because what was the point? Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Catherine, we need to discuss the estate. Dad's assets, the properties, the business holdings. We need to establish how everything will be distributed." I'd known this conversation was coming. Thomas had assured me repeatedly during those final weeks that I'd be taken care of, that he'd made arrangements. But sitting across from his sons in the living room where Thomas and I had spent countless evenings reading together, I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Your father and I discussed everything," I said quietly. "He told me not to worry." Damien leaned forward, his expression what I suppose he thought was sympathetic. "Catherine, we know this is difficult. Losing Dad was hard on all of us. But there are practical matters that can't wait." Marcus pulled a leather folder from his briefcase and set it on the coffee table between us. The gesture was theatrical, designed to intimidate. I'd seen Thomas use similar tactics in business negotiations, though he'd always done it with more subtlety. "The will is very specific," Marcus said, opening the folder with deliberate slowness. "The primary residence here in Portland, valued at approximately $900,000, transfers to Damien and myself jointly. The lake house in Montana, $750,000, also comes to us. The business assets, roughly $500,000, will be divided between us as well." Each number felt like a blow. Our home, the place where Thomas and I had celebrated anniversaries and hosted holiday dinners, where we'd planted the garden together and argued about paint colors, gone. The lake house where we'd spent our honeymoon, where Thomas had proposed on the dock at sunset, gone. "And what about me?" I asked. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. Marcus didn't hesitate. "The life insurance policy comes to you. $250,000. That should be sufficient for your needs. 24 years of marriage. 24 years of building a life with Thomas. Of supporting his business decisions, of caring for him through his illness. Reduced to $250,000 while his sons walked away with everything else. There's also the matter of medical expenses," Damien added, and something in his tone made my stomach turn. "Dad's treatment was extensive. The insurance covered most of it, but there's still about $200,000 outstanding. As his widow, you're legally responsible for those debts." The room tilted slightly. $200,000 in debt against $250,000 in insurance. That would leave me with $50,000 to rebuild my entire life at 61 years old. "Surely the estate," I started, but Marcus cut me off smoothly. "The estate assets are tied up in probate. Given the specific terms of the will, those debts fall to you separately. It's unfortunate, but that's how these things work legally." I stared at them both. These men who'd called me Catherine at their father's funeral just days ago, who'd stood beside me at the cemetery with appropriately somber expressions. Now they were here with their calculators and their legal documents, dividing up their father's life like he was a business deal that had finally closed. I need time to process this, I said finally. Of course, Marcus said, standing and straightening his suit jacket. Take the time you need, but understand, probate moves quickly. We'll need your cooperation to settle everything efficiently. And Catherine, the medical bills, the longer they sit unpaid, the more complicated things become. They left me alone in the house that would soon belong to someone else, surrounded by memories that apparently had a price tag. I sat in Thomas's favorite chair, the leather worn smooth from years of his evening reading, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. That's when I noticed the small drawer in the side table next to his chair. It was slightly open, something Thomas would never have left that way. He'd been meticulous about details, even in those final days when the pain had made it difficult to concentrate. Inside the drawer, beneath old receipts and a pair of reading glasses he'd stopped wearing, my fingers touched something unexpected, a small brass key, old and worn, attached to a tag with just 3 numbers written in Thomas's distinctive handwriting. 379. I turned the key over in my palm, studying it. Thomas had never mentioned a safety deposit box, had never given me any indication he was keeping secrets. But then again, in those final weeks, there had been so many moments when he'd seemed like he wanted to tell me something. When his eyes would search mine with an urgency that went beyond his illness. Through the window, I could see Damien's car still in the driveway. He was on his phone, gesturing animatedly, probably already making plans for his inheritance. Marcus stood beside the car, arms crossed, watching the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. I slipped the key into my pocket and felt its weight there, small but significant. Tomorrow I would find out what it opened. Tonight, I would let Marcus and Damien think they'd won. The next morning, I drove to every bank in Portland. First National, Pacific Trust, United Savings, asking each time if they had a box registered to Thomas Wells, number 379. By noon, I was beginning to think the key was nothing, just another mystery I'd never solve. Then I walked into Columbia Bank on Morrison Street. The manager, a woman named Patricia with kind eyes and silver hair, looked at the key and nodded immediately. Yes, Mrs. Wells, your husband opened that box about 7 months ago. He was very specific that only you should have access. 7 months ago. Right when Thomas's symptoms had started, when he'd begun having those unexplained dizzy spells and moments of confusion that would eventually lead to his diagnosis. He'd known something was wrong, had been preparing even then. Patricia led me down to the vault, a quiet room with fluorescent lights and walls lined with small metal doors. She found box 379, inserted her key alongside mine, and pulled out a long metal drawer. Would you like privacy? She asked gently. Please, I said. Alone in the small viewing room, I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were documents, dozens of them, all neatly organized in labeled folders. But it was the envelope on top that caught my attention first. It was addressed to me in Thomas's handwriting, and the paper felt heavy, expensive, important. My dearest Catherine, the letter began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and my sons have shown you exactly who they are. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive, but I needed to be certain of their intentions. I needed to know if they would honor our marriage or treat you as an obstacle to be removed. My hands shook as I continued reading. Thomas explained how he'd grown suspicious 6 months before his death when Marcus had started asking detailed questions about the estate. Questions that seemed less about concern for his father's welfare and more about calculating future wealth. He'd hired a private investigator, a man named David Chen, who'd uncovered things that had broken Thomas's heart. Marcus has been falsifying documents, the letter continued, using my signature on loan papers without my knowledge or consent. He's been taking out lines of credit against the family business, funneling money into offshore accounts. Damien is worse. He's been running investment scams, stealing from elderly clients who trusted him with their retirement savings. Both of them are drowning in debt and legal troubles, and they see my death as their financial salvation. I had to stop reading for a moment, the betrayal so overwhelming it was hard to breathe. Thomas had known all of this, had carried this knowledge through his final months, protecting me from it while gathering evidence. The letter continued with details that made my stomach turn. Thomas had confronted his sons privately about a month before his death, given them a chance to come clean and make things right. Instead, they denied everything and begun planning more aggressively to secure their inheritance the moment he was gone. So I've created a different will, the letter explained. Not the one Martin Rodriguez has, the attorney they think is handling my estate. That's an old version I never updated. The real will is with Chen and Associates, and it leaves everything to you. The house, the lake property, the business assets, all of it. My sons will inherit nothing unless you choose to give them something. I read that paragraph 3 times, hardly believing what it said. Thomas had left everything to me. But there was more, the properties they think they're inheriting. I've leveraged them heavily over the past 6 months. The house has a mortgage of $1.1 million against it. The lake house has liens totaling $800,000. If they insist on taking those properties through the old will, they'll be inheriting debt, not assets. The money from those mortgages is sitting in an account only you can access, Wells Family Trust. At this very bank, I sat back in my chair, stunned. Thomas had created a trap, an elaborate scheme to either protect me or punish his sons. Depending on their choices, the life insurance they mentioned is real. The letter continued, but it's not for $250,000. That's a small policy I kept for years. The real policy, the one I took out 2 years ago when I started having health concerns, is for $800,000. Combined with the trust account funds and the business assets that aren't encumbered, you'll have approximately $4.3 million in accessible resources. $4.3 million. I wasn't just secure, I was wealthy. But Thomas's final paragraph was what made tears stream down my face. Catherine, my love, I know this seems cruel. I know you'll wonder why I didn't just tell you while I was alive. But I needed you to see who Marcus and Damien truly are, without my influence, without me there to mediate or make excuses for them. They will show you their real selves when they think I'm not watching. And when they do, you'll know with absolute certainty that any kindness you show them is a choice you make freely, not an obligation you feel toward me. I trust your judgment completely. You are stronger and smarter than you've ever given yourself credit for, and whatever you decide about their inheritance, I will support from wherever I am now. All my love always, Thomas. I spent 2 hours in that viewing room, going through every document Thomas had left me. Bank statements showing the hidden accounts. Legal papers documenting Marcus's forgery and Damien's fraud. A second will, properly executed and witnessed, leaving everything to me. Contact information for David Chen, the private investigator who had all the original evidence. And a detailed accounting of every lie his sons had told. Every manipulation they'd attempted while he was dying. By the time I left the bank, I had a clear picture of what Thomas had built. Not just the financial trap, but a complete record of his son's betrayal. He'd given me power, real power, and the choice of what to do with it. My phone rang as I was walking to my car. It was Marcus. Catherine, we need to meet with Martin Rodriguez today. There are papers that need your signature, time-sensitive documents related to the medical debt. Can you be at his office in an hour? The urgency in his voice told me everything. They were rushing me, trying to get signatures before I had time to think or investigate or discover what Thomas had really left behind. I'll be there, I said calmly. Excellent, Marcus said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. This will all be over soon, and you can start moving forward with your life. Yes, I thought, looking at the folder of documents in my hands. It will be over soon. Martin Rodriguez's office was on the 20th floor of a glass tower downtown, all polished surfaces and expensive furniture designed to intimidate. I'd been there once before with Thomas for some routine legal work, and I remembered being impressed by the view and the obvious wealth on display. Marcus and Damien were already there when I arrived, sitting in the conference room with Martin. They'd brought someone else with them, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who Marcus introduced as Jennifer Kwan, their attorney. 4 against 1. They'd come prepared for a battle they didn't think I was capable of fighting. Catherine, thank you for coming, Martin said, gesturing to a chair across from them. We have documents prepared that will make the transfer of assets as smooth as possible and address the outstanding medical expenses. I sat down slowly, setting my purse on the table. Inside the purse was the folder from the safety deposit box, but I didn't mention it yet. How thoughtful, I said. Jennifer pushed a stack of papers across the table toward me. These are straightforward release forms. You are acknowledging the terms of Thomas's will and agreeing to assume responsibility for the medical debt. Once you sign, we can begin the probate process and you'll receive the life insurance payout and the medical bills, I said. 200,000, you mentioned? Marcus nodded gravely. Unfortunately, yes. But the insurance should cover most of it, leaving you with enough to make a fresh start at 61 with $50,000. How generous. I picked up the papers and began reading through them slowly. Jennifer shifted in her seat, clearly impatient. Catherine, I know legal documents can be confusing. Perhaps I can summarize the key points. I continued reading, ignoring her. The more I read, the clearer their strategy became. They'd structured everything so that I would sign away all rights to contest the will, accept full financial responsibility for debts, and agree to vacate the house within 30 days. It was elegant in its cruelty, legally binding me to poverty while they walked away with millions. There's a problem, I said finally, setting the papers down. A problem, Marcus repeated, his voice carefully controlled. Several problems, actually. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own folder. Starting with the fact that this isn't Thomas's final will, the room went very quiet. Martin leaned forward, confusion crossing his face. I'm sorry, Catherine, but I can assure you that the will we're working with is properly executed and legally binding. I'm sure it is, I said. It's also outdated. Thomas created a new will 7 months ago with a different attorney, David Chen at Chen and Associates. That's the legally binding document. I slid a copy across the table. Marcus grabbed it, his face going pale as he read. This is impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's very possible, I replied. Thomas was quite thorough. He hired a private investigator who documented all of your activities for the past year. The forged signatures, Marcus. The embezzled client funds, Damien. The offshore accounts. The mounting debts you both thought you could solve with your inheritance. Damien made a choking sound. I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? I pulled out more documents. Bank records showing Marcus had taken out $600,000 in fraudulent loans using Thomas's signature. Wire transfer records proving Damien had stolen nearly $400,000 from his investment clients. Recorded phone conversations where they discussed timing the estate settlement to pay off their creditors. Jennifer was reading through the will copy, her professional composure cracking. These properties, they're mortgaged, she said. Marcus, did you know about these liens? What liens? Marcus demanded, his carefully constructed authority crumbling. The ones Thomas took out 6 months ago, I explained. 1.1 million against the house. 800,000 against the lake property. You're not inheriting assets, gentlemen. You're inheriting debt. Nearly 2 million in debt, secured against properties worth 1.6 million total. That's not possible, Damien whispered. The house is paid off. Has been for years. It was, I agreed. But Thomas had every right to borrow against his own property. And he did, repeatedly. The money from those mortgages is sitting safely in an account that only I can access. Martin Rodriguez looked like a man who'd just been hit with a truck. Catherine, I had no knowledge of any of this. Thomas never mentioned changing attorneys or creating new estate documents. I know, I said gently. He didn't tell you because he wasn't sure if someone in your firm was feeding information to Marcus and Damien. He decided to handle his final arrangements privately. This is fraud, Marcus said, his voice rising. You're trying to steal our inheritance. Your inheritance, I repeated. Thomas left you both exactly what he thought you deserved. Would you like me to read the relevant clause? I opened to the bookmarked page. I leave any decisions regarding assets or inheritance for my sons Marcus and Damien entirely to my wife Catherine, trusting in her wisdom to determine what they truly deserve based on their actions and character. He left it up to me, I continued. And based on the evidence he gathered, based on how you've treated me since his death, based on the fact that you were stealing from your own father while he was dying, I've made my decision. I pulled out one final document. This is a gift deed. I'm giving you exactly what you tried to give me. Marcus, you'll receive the house with its $1.1 million mortgage. Damien, you'll get the lake property with its $800,000 in liens. You'll own properties worth approximately $300,000 less than you owe on them. Several problems, actually. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own folder. Starting with the fact that this isn't Thomas's final will, the room went very quiet. Martin leaned forward, confusion crossing his face. I'm sorry, Catherine, but I can assure you that the will we're working with is properly executed and legally binding. I'm sure it is, I said. It's also outdated. Thomas created a new will 7 months ago with a different attorney, David Chen at Chen and Associates. That's the legally binding document. I slid a copy across the table. Marcus grabbed it, his face going pale as he read. This is impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's very possible, I replied. Thomas was quite thorough. He hired a private investigator who documented all of your activities for the past year. The forged signatures, Marcus. The embezzled client funds, Damien. The offshore accounts. The mounting debts you both thought you could solve with your inheritance. Damien made a choking sound. I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? I pulled out more documents. Bank records showing Marcus had taken out $600,000 in fraudulent loans using Thomas's signature. Wire transfer records proving Damien had stolen nearly $400,000 from his investment clients. Recorded phone conversations where they discussed timing the estate settlement to pay off their creditors. Jennifer was reading through the will copy, her professional composure cracking. These properties, they're mortgaged, she said. Marcus, did you know about these liens? What liens? Marcus demanded, his carefully constructed authority crumbling. The ones Thomas took out 6 months ago, I explained. $1.1 million against the house. $800,000 against the lake property. You're not inheriting assets, gentlemen. You're inheriting debt. Nearly $2 million in debt, secured against properties worth $1.6 million total. That's not possible, Damien whispered. The house is paid off. Has been for years. It was, I agreed. But Thomas had every right to borrow against his own property. And he did, repeatedly. The money from those mortgages is sitting safely in an account that only I can access. Martin Rodriguez looked like a man who'd just been hit with a truck. Catherine, I had no knowledge of any of this. Thomas never mentioned changing attorneys or creating new estate documents. I know, I said gently. He didn't tell you because he wasn't sure if someone in your firm was feeding information to Marcus and Damien. He decided to handle his final arrangements privately. This is fraud, Marcus said, his voice rising. You're trying to steal our inheritance. Your inheritance, I repeated. Thomas left you both exactly what he thought you deserved. Would you like me to read the relevant clause? I opened to the bookmarked page. I leave any decisions regarding assets or inheritance for my sons Marcus and Damien entirely to my wife Catherine, trusting in her wisdom to determine what they truly deserve based on their actions and character. He left it up to me, I continued. And based on the evidence he gathered, based on how you've treated me since his death, based on the fact that you were stealing from your own father while he was dying, I've made my decision. I pulled out one final document. This is a gift deed. I'm giving you exactly what you tried to give me. Marcus, you'll receive the house with its $1.1 million mortgage. Damien, you'll get the lake property with its $800,000 in liens. You'll own properties worth approximately $300,000 less than you owe on them. You can't do this, Marcus said, but there was no fight left in his voice. Actually, I can. It's exactly what Thomas intended. You can accept these properties and try to deal with the debt, or you can walk away and I'll donate everything to charity. Those are your options. Jennifer was reading through all the documents I'd provided, her expression growing darker by the moment. Marcus, Damien, we need to talk privately. These allegations of fraud and embezzlement, if Mrs. Wells pursues this, you're both looking at serious criminal charges. I have no interest in seeing anyone in prison, I said quietly. Thomas didn't want that either. He wanted his sons to face the consequences of their choices, to understand what it feels like to be trapped by debt and desperation. That's punishment enough. The meeting ended with Marcus and Damien signing the papers in stunned silence. They had no choice. The alternative was criminal prosecution, and even in their desperation, they understood they'd been thoroughly outmaneuvered. As they filed out of the conference room, Damien paused at the door. He really planned all of this, every detail.